Okay, so here we are working on step 8, example number 9, one of our longer examples. And the point of step 8 is to kick off the training wheels a little bit. We're not going to require diagramming or the evaluating of every single premise along all 3 of the ARG conditions. Now, that can be a fine way to pre-write, by the way, if you have the time and the inclination. You can end up with a really good and insightful evaluation of an argument. But that's not technically part of step 8, because what we're working on in step 8 is integrating all of that so that we can come up with an evaluation that any reasonably intelligent person could understand. That also means that we can't use jargon. We can't use words that only someone who has taken this particular course would understand. So I don't want to hear the word premise. I don't want to hear even acceptable, although that the common sense use of the word acceptable is quite close to the way we've used it as a technical term. So the important things about step 8 are to make a judgment about the argument, and there's lots of different ways to do that, but you're really answering the question, is this particular argument persuasive to me at this time? And then to back up that judgment. So let's start by just reminding ourselves about this argument. Because this is quite long, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to read it, and then I'm going to start making some pre-writing notes of points that I want to work into my evaluation. All right, let's just make some pre-writing notes. Author is correct that tipping in general incentivizes, that's an ugly word, I'm not going to use it in my final writing, good service. But note that this is only the case in general. That is, if people generally tip, then servers have good reason to provide good service. This logic doesn't work in individual cases. I'm trying to get here at something that I think I found maybe way back in step 6 or 7, that this logic doesn't work really well after you've already received the service, right? Which is when you have to decide whether to tip in most individual cases. So if I've already received good service, there's not much incentive for me to tip because I've already gotten away with it. I've gotten great service and I can still tip not at all or at a ridiculously low rate. So I'm trying to get at the idea that this is not very persuasive if I'm making a case at the end of a meal. It is persuasive as a general pattern, right? A general habit, a general pattern of behavior. So I want to make that point. I also want to point out that the author has identified accurately things that customers care about. So that part of the argument is quite good, right? I mean, the customers do care about getting their drink refilled and things like that. So the author has done that well. But the author hasn't addressed any potential negative ramifications or effects of tipping. So it hasn't asked, well, what might be some negative things that could come from a general habit of tipping? For example, restaurant owners could feel emboldened about continuing to offer very low wages. And that seems at least something I want to think about. Nor has the author talked about just how hard the job is. So a couple of things that the author could have addressed but didn't. And I want to include that in my evaluation. So I've noticed in my pre-writing, I've noticed some good things, I've noticed some omissions, but overall I think the strengths of the argument outweigh its weaknesses. It's persuasive. All right, let me get to writing the evaluation and working in some of these ideas. This author has provided a strong argument. Although it is not without its weaknesses, it generally persuades me that people should tip. The author does a good job of identifying aspects of service at a restaurant that customers care about. do, in fact, want my drink refilled promptly, and I do want my food to be served hot. And so notice that I'm not just repeating the argument, I'm analyzing it. I'm saying the author is identifying aspects of service that customers care about and doing so accurately. And I know that because I share these things. And certainly the practice of tipping in the context of quite low wages that servers can rely on can increase the quality of the service that customers receive. So I'm noticing the good ones, like yes, these are things we care about. Yes, the practice of tipping can do it. However, this is only the case when we're thinking about tipping as a general pattern of behavior. In other words, the evidence that the author provides is not quite as convincing when it's considered in the context of an individual meal. Why, let's see, I don't need to incentivize, I don't like incentivize. I don't need to give my server a reason to provide good service after the service has already been provided. There are also some important aspects of tipping as a social phenomenon that the author could have addressed but didn't. Most crucially, the author did not consider the potentially negative effects of tipping. Maybe restaurant owners wouldn't pay such low wages to begin with if tipping didn't exist. The author also could have done more to describe just how difficult the job of waiting table is. I don't like that. Just how difficult the job is to wait on tables. The degree of, nope. It's a job that requires significant intellectual skills, particularly memorization, not to mention a thick enough skin to deal with a not always polite public. Despite these omissions, however, the author does provide enough evidence, mostly in the vein of self-interest, to convince the reader that tipping is the way to go. All right, so now I need to double check myself. Have I taken a stance? Have I judged the argument? And in fact, I have, right up here. And again, lots of different ways to phrase your judgment of an argument. You can say this argument fails entirely. This argument is utterly persuasive and any reasonable person should accept the conclusion. Except, I'm not even sure I want to use the word conclusion, but lots of different ways. But the important thing is to take a stance. You can sometimes think of step 8 as a movie review. You know, you want to read a movie review and you don't want to be in any doubt as to whether the reviewer thought it was a good movie or not. So definitely have to take a stance. And then have I provided evidence that my evaluation is accurate? And in fact, I have. I have pointed out things that the author has done well. I have pointed out things that the author has not done well. And then, really importantly, I have balanced the two. I have claimed that the strengths of the argument outweigh its weaknesses. So in that sense, I've considered both sides. And I've not used any jargon. That's important. Anyone could follow this evaluation. That's not to say that anyone would agree with it, but anyone could follow it. So that's a good evaluation. What I'm going to do before I hand it in is I would just delete the pre-writing. You don't have to delete your pre-writing, but at least when I'm evaluating step 8, I only look at the evaluation. I only look to see whether the student has used the ARG conditions, even though we don't use the terms. So I've used the idea of sufficiency here. Has the author done enough? Even if the author has omitted some. I've used the idea of acceptability. Yeah, that's true. I do want my drink refilled. I do want my food to be hot. So I've used the tools of acceptability, relevance, and sufficiency without using the terms themselves. So that is a good step 8.